Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. I recently saw a reviewer reviewing a novel, and the author was a straight male, and the two lead characters, one was a trans woman and the other was a gay man. And this reviewer, her only argument against this book was that this author should not have written that book because it wasn't his story to tell. Because he's straight and the characters were both trans and gay. This is hands down the most idiotic concept in publishing right now. And if you follow this to its logical conclusion, you'll see how absurd it is. This is like saying that I shouldn't write a sci-fi book from the point of view of an alien because it's not my story to tell. Or that none of us should be writing post-apocalyptic, dystopian, young adult romances because they're not our stories to tell. It's absolutely idiotic. And if you think about it, whether or not you belong to some marginalized group, it's a good thing when people who do not belong to your group empathize with your story enough to actually tell it in a way that a broader audience can understand it. You should want that. You should want people from other groups who are not the same as you to empathize with you enough to be able to tell your story. One of the things that I talk about with art is that art communicates something to the audience that they wouldn't normally be able to articulate on their own. You could have two authors, one of whom is trans and one of whom is cis. And the cis author might be able to tell a story that could cast some light on the trans position or the trans experience that the trans author either isn't capable of simply because they don't have the skill or that they just haven't thought of. Everybody has their own story to tell. You know, if you think about it, it's like saying that Brokeback Mountain should never have been made because the author of the original short story was straight, the director of the movie was straight, the screenwriter was straight, and both of the lead characters were played by straight men. And you're telling me that that movie should never have been made, should never have had the cultural impact that it had. Nobody should ever have heard that story because none of the people involved had the right to tell that story because it wasn't their story to tell. It's nonsensical. Or that Boys Don't Cry should never have been made because Hilary Swank isn't trans. It's stupid. It makes absolutely no sense at all. It would be like me saying that nobody should ever tell a story of childhood abuse because it's not their story to tell. That no one who ever writes those stories could ever understand my personal individual experience. Of course they can't, because it's my experience. And if you take it even further to its furthest logical conclusion, you have to understand these are fictional characters. They only have a story in the author's mind. They're not people that someone is taking their story away from them and telling it as if it was their own. The story is the author's. The person doesn't exist. So in a way, you're arguing that fiction shouldn't exist. Because as fiction writers, we're telling somebody else's story, and it's not our story to tell. So the entire fiction industry shouldn't exist, that we should only ever be trying to write autobiographical nonfiction, because any of us only has the right to tell our own story. It's ridiculous. It's idiotic. And it's actually harming whatever group you think you're championing with this idea, whatever marginalized group, you're actually harming them because you're stopping people from telling their stories in a way that the audience might be able to relate to. You know, two authors, regardless of what they identify as, they're going to tell two different stories simply based on their own experience. And the audience has a right to hear both of those stories because both of them could be offering a completely different take on the same situation. And it's not to say that a cis author or a straight author or whoever it is doesn't have something valuable to add to the conversation simply because they're not the ones that's personally going through it. That's nonsense. And if you are going to make that argument, then you need to take it all the way to its farthest end and realize that what you're talking about is the end of all fiction. Because that would be like saying we shouldn't be writing fiction at all, and that's ridiculous. That's not what we're here for, and it's not what the readers are here for either. What they're here for is a story, and that's all that matters. And good writing is invisible. The only thing that exists is the interaction between the reader and the story. And a good author, if they've done their job, the author becomes invisible as well. You know, no one thinks when they watch Brokeback Mountain, no one is thinking that these people are straight. You just don't think that because it all disappears. You get completely immersed in the story. That's what good fiction does. No one is thinking about who and what the author is or how they identify when they're reading a good story. They're just transported into the story itself. And that's what good fiction is supposed to do. So this question needs to be taken off the table entirely. It's one of the reasons why the fiction market is failing right now. And it's in such a bad state because people are making moronic statements like this and expecting the entire industry to fall in line with something that makes absolutely no sense. And it actually will end up destroying our industry. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now. So I hope this helps. I'll see you next week.